Strategy and sacrifice are two sides of the same coin. The larger the market you seek to address, the narrower must be your focus. Everybody's car is really like everybody else's car. Everybody's bike is like everybody else's bike. So in this industry, we compete not really on making a better product, but by trying to create the perception that we make a better product. This quarrel is that in management, we are not really taught where growth ends and greed starts. When I finished college in the late 80s, we read about in search of excellence and world-class excellence and stuff. And then it went on to Kaizen, just in time, at least in our industry, Japanese manufacturing practices, Toyota manufacturing system. Then it went into Six Sigma, Lean, PQM, Deming, Juran. Before we had come to terms with that, it became Blue Ocean, core competence, bottom of the pyramid.
Rajiv, I'm going to ask you that first. What do you consider to be the underlying strengths of the Indian entrepreneur?
I'd like to think the answer is in those two words. The first strength is simply to be in this marketplace. In many ways, if I were to illustrate with some examples from my industry, not only the fact that we are in the world's second largest motorcycle market, but what really has helped shape Bajaj and shape our industry is something which are very intrinsic to this market. First and foremost, I would say, if I were to put it positively from a government's point of view, the fact that we are a democracy, we have a certain openness, there is a motivation to innovate, and your innovation is rewarding because it's respected. So one of our key differentiators vis-a-vis, let's say, our Chinese competitors has been that there is a motivation to innovate in this marketplace. Whereas when I look at our Chinese competitors, there is no motivation to innovate there because before you finish the innovation, 3 other people are already doing the same thing. There's no reward for your motivation. If I were to pay our government a backhanded compliment, when they keep fuel prices at 60 rupees a litre, it pushes us to make very fuel efficient motorcycles. And one reason why there is no Chinese motorcycle on these roads is because Indian consumers have been conditioned to become so sensitive to fuel prices that it keeps the Chinese out, for example. So I think being Indian in so many ways and being part of this marketplace is one great strength. The second word, entrepreneurship, to me really means adapting. I think it's a great strength of the Indian entrepreneurs I know, that despite all the problems on the system, they are able to be resourceful, think out of the box. They're able to adapt to the situation. Even when I heard the stories that I heard the last two, their ability to adapt themselves to find solutions for apparently simple problems like clean water or housing was amazing. So I think being in India and having the ability to adapt are the two greatest strengths.
What do you think is this the beginning of what we see as, Indian companies really making a mark on a worldwide basis, and actually going, despite of having a large Indian market, also thinking in global terms for all their products and services?
Well, I think if we cast a look back on several decades of development across the world, it's fairly well proven that unless you are first strong in your backyard, you really can't venture out into the neighborhood and prove a point. So whatever areas it is in which India affords the opportunity for companies like ours to be big and strong and to be excellent, we have to first create that excellence here. And for sure, then we can scale it up and take it outside. And that's what we did. Because if I may say so, when my father was running Bajaj Auto, I think I can say that the market for Bajaj Auto was only India. And that's why we made every kind of two-wheeler. We started with the scooter, but then we made scooterets and some motorcycles and mopeds and stuff like that. And gradually our focus changed. And we looked at becoming a regional player. We went out into Sri Lanka and Bangladesh and neighboring countries. And today, of course, almost a third of what we make is exported. This year, for example, we will export $1 billion worth of motorcycles and three-wheelers. And that represents about 1.2 million vehicles, which is a very big number. And it is a well-proven principle of marketing that the larger the market you seek to address, the narrower must be your focus. When I hear a gentleman wanting to provide clean water to all of India, then he has to just focus on water. He can't focus on 20 other things. If Tendulkar wants to dominate the world, he has to play one game well. So that's when we changed our strategy. We did away with all other product lines. We focused on one thing, which was motorcycles. And we said to ourselves that if we want to be globally relevant and dominant, we have to do one thing really well. And that's why we sacrificed everything else and moved to the motorcycle strategy. Because for me, strategy and sacrifice are two sides of the same coin.
So competition is much more, it's greater, competition is coming from different sources. How would you, from your own experiences, what lessons do you think, what should entrepreneurs in this room, worry about, in the changed circumstances?
Well, in order that people should believe in what I have to say, let me start with two examples. One from the engineering or the product industry, which is Apple, and the other from the so-called services industry, which is Microsoft. Two companies that were said to recently have a market cap of $250 billion each, and dominant players in their categories, and they all do just one thing well. Now, our problem specifically for my company is not only that it's so competitive, we also belong to an industry where technology is fairly mature. I mean, everybody's car is really like everybody else's car. Everybody's bike is like everybody else's bike. So in this industry, we compete not really on making a better product, but by trying to create the perception that we make a better product. And yeah, it's true. And now, as Ogilvy said, the consumer is your wife, she's not a moron. So people will not easily give you that favor, that they will grant you that you have a better product or a perception of a better product. So really at the end of the day, however simple it may sound, the only hope of creating a perception that one makes a better product is to sacrifice all other products. So not only does it within the company align the entire organization, and as Mr. Kamath said, its resources, its capital, its energy, and every best man to one task, but more importantly at the front end, it seems to say to the audience that if this guy, this company is willing to put everything behind one thing, maybe he does a better job at that thing. And that's why publicly my father and I have this squabble where he keeps saying, I think we should make scooters. And I say, no, I'm not going to make a scooter. And it saves a lot of advertising dollars when you get publicity like that. And it creates the perception that they are doing something specialized. So the perception of specialization is the key to competing in this sort of an industry.
But, in fact, I'm going to push you on that, Rajiv, and I'm saying, when you say perception, but the perception is also a increasing reality. Because you can't just have smoke and mirrors, and convince, because the, customer is your wife.
I'll just interject here, I think I am fully with Rajiv on this. And perception, as you said, has to be followed by the works. You cannot have perception alone. And the example is very simple. I went to Bajaj Auto, I think, just as you were launching Pulsar. You weren't there, so your brother was there. So there was a bike there, and I said, can I ride it? He said, okay. So I broke a rule, which was I rode it without a helmet. So you'll pardon me for that, that's separate. But that's not the issue. I've been an enthusiast of bikes, and I sat on that bike, I put it into gear, and I rolled the accelerator, and the pep that I had, I said, this bike kicks ass. And this bike is going to and I can tell him that before that, a few years earlier, I had seen the launch of another 100cc bike, that was a 100cc bike. It was a very tame affair. So if I benchmark, I could see that this is, so now the perception in my mind of this bike is completely different from the perception of bikes that I've driven in India. That perception, I think, stayed with a whole lot of customers, and that product became a bestseller, as did several other products. So when Rajiv talks of perception, I think a whole lot of quality and what the customer wants that has gone into the bike, and thereafter the perception is built around that.
Give me 2 minutes, Mr. Sridhar, to elaborate on this point, because most marketing people get away with this. They will tell you perception is everything, and what we have learned the hard way is perception is the fruit, but differentiation is the root. And how does one create differentiation? And we have found 4 very simple but very sound strategies to do this. The most powerful of which we like to call the offense or the opposite strategy. Because when we reflected back, when we looked at our Chetak, which was the best-selling two-wheeler in this country, it was eventually replaced, not by another scooter, which was somewhat better than it, but as Mr. Kamath says, it was replaced by a Splendor, which had nothing in common with it. This was a scooter, this was a bike, this was 2-stroke, 4-stroke, side engine, middle engine, hand gear, foot gear, expensive, cheap, blah, blah. Small tires, big tires, storage space, no storage space. They had nothing in common. What works in the marketplace is being the opposite of the leader. The truth is counterintuitive. Most of us, the marketing and sales people especially, they just follow what I like to call the pizza approach. There's a big pizza out there and I want a slice of that. And that doesn't work because the consumer sees through that. In fact, when I make a bike like Hero Honda's, the consumer says to himself, wow, now even Bajaj is endorsing Hero Honda, maybe I should go and buy Hero Honda. But when I make a Pulsar, which is the opposite of Hero Honda, then there's at least some people there, like him, for whom it's a very different sensation. And we have found also by experience that we can make this tangible. To be the opposite of something, you have to be at least 50% different on the attribute of your choice, which means if Hero Honda's bike is 8 horsepower, the Pulsar had to be at least 12 horsepower to convey that it is different. If the Hero Honda fuel tank was 10 liters in capacity, the Pulsar had to be at least 15. We made it 18. So it is not just by nebulous stuff, it is by hard numbers that one can crack the problem.
Okay. In fact, before I ask the Kamath, excellent. I think both of you, as I said, are great believers in technology and innovation. Is innovation in India, approached or done differently? Is the appropriateness, in fact, I heard one of my Silicon Valley friends actually say that you got to bring the science and the technology from the West. But in India, you have got to change all the ways in which you arrive at it and do it, which is very peculiarly Indian, and appropriate for the Indian conditions. Would you agree with that statement, or?
Well, I have no disagreement with that statement. I'd first like to say that, when we started our journey to motorcycles with the Pulsar, the guy that was put in charge of it was a guy called Joseph Abraham. He's our head of R&D now. He is from REC Bhopal. He was not from, as somebody said, some fancy IIT or something like that. And he just did his bachelor's, joined Bajaj from there, worked with me a few years in manufacturing. And he was just a natural completely, by which I mean that no matter how big the jump, he always landed right. And Joe, at the age of 27 or so, took up the task of designing the Pulsar when he had never designed anything before that. Now, I'm sure every country has its fair share of talent, and by the same measure, so does this country. If in the 60s, 70s and 80s, the Pulsars didn't happen, it's not because the Joes were not there, but for some reason they were working elsewhere and not working in this country. So that's for the country to think about and reflect on. In terms of innovation itself, I have no quarrel with the proposition that innovation is so important, and there's a conference on innovation every day in this country. The problem for managers like me is, how do I make it happen? So in that context, what I have found very useful is the notion or the idea that companies don't manage brands, or companies shouldn't manage brands. We can manage our products, but not our brands. It is the brand that must manage us. So it depends on what the brand is. And that's why I went away from Bajaj as a brand, because I didn't know what Bajaj stood for anymore. But when we say Pulsar or Discover or RE, which is our three-wheeler, I'm very clear. And so is every employee in the company. They don't need the managing director to tell them in a long rambling speech what the Pulsar stands for. Everybody knows Pulsar is supposed to be a sexy, fast motorcycle. And then all innovation for the Pulsar must be driven towards making it sexier and faster. Whereas for the Discover, the innovation may lie in the area of fuel economy and stability. For the three-wheeler, it may lie in durability and comfort. So the problem is not that engineers are not capable of innovation. I think the problem is more, at least it was for us, managers are not able to channelize and align that innovation in the direction of the business strategy to make the most of it. So by going for a brand-centered approach, we are now able to say clearly what innovation applies to what. And that makes things happen in the marketplace.
In fact, I'm going to bring you back to the theme of this conference, which is enterprising India, changing the nation, leading the world. I can remember once, I was attending a conference and Shumantra Ghoshal, actually said that we as Indians have an enormous capacity and ability to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. And that stuck with me, that statement always stuck with me. What are the challenges that we face, in achieving this?
See, to me, as some of the earlier speakers talked about the so-called meltdown in the world, etc. If I reflect back on that, my biggest quarrel with management science, I have many quarrels with management science, but my biggest quarrel is that in management, we are not really taught where growth ends and greed starts. So everybody must grow, otherwise we are complacent. Now, when am I growing too little is easy to understand because I can see the competition going past me. But when am I growing so much that it is likely in the long term to be inimical to my business is not very obvious. So, and as Mr. Kamath mentioned, it is very easy ultimately to let your ego get ahead of you and to cause damage in the longer term. So this is the biggest issue. And in the interest of being consistent, I would once again say that a brand-centered strategy provides at least some calibration in this respect, in the sense that if I have to be true to a Pulsar, then a Pulsar can only be a Pulsar. It should not be made into anything more than that. The reason for success of Bajaj in the 60s, 70s and 80s was because there was only one Bajaj called a value for money two-wheeler. When Bajaj also became a little scooter, a bigger motorcycle, a hair oil, a tube light, a mixer grinder, a insurance scheme, a finance company, nobody knew what Bajaj was anymore. So a great American once told me, all questions will be answered if we can answer the question, who am I? And this is most important. The brand tells me who I am. And if I know who I am and I stay within that, then it is like Sita staying within the Rekha. No Ravan can take her away. But if you get greedy and you cross the line, that is where the problem. I think at least in some areas, as I see my own, whether it's auto or engineering, I see a very unique opportunity in the way we can realign things. Because in the end, I think the job of the management is to align the opportunity at the front end of the business in terms of brand, marketing, sales, etc. perfectly or as perfectly as possible with the competence at the back end of the organization in terms of quality, productivity, cost, etc. So I think it appears to me from at least the context of engineering industry that we are able to define a very competitive back end. And if we are able to then align that with a very sharp front end, then I think in many businesses, the opportunity to, I don't know whether to lead the world or dominate the world, but certainly to participate in a very significant way should arise. And this alignment between the front end and the back end is what is most important, because the two biggest mistakes we make is to get greedy at the front end and diffuse our business, or to make the back end very complicated. And complexity is the enemy of execution. So if we can keep it sharp at the front end and simple at the back end and keep the two aligned, then I think there are many industries, as I can see, where India can participate very successfully on a world stage.
I'll flip that question. India was thought to be not an innovative country. I think things are now changing dramatically.
Yeah, I think I would reiterate once again that it depends on what you mean by innovation. Innovation is not always invention. The apple doesn't have to fall on our head, and we don't have to have a new light bulb out there. But innovation in most industries, barring a very few which are still leapfrogging in terms of technology, innovation, as I said earlier, has to be directed not so much at offering a better product or service, but towards the perception of a better product or service. And to give you a slightly more granularity on that, I would say this. We have found in our experience that when we compete on a attribute like fuel economy or power or comfort or price with the competition, if we make an improvement of 0 to 10% compared to the competition, then it's typically me too. The consumer doesn't perceive it. If it's 10 to 20%, it's what we call a defense strategy, which means it's a good improvement, but it's not a differentiator. If it's 20 to 33%, it's what we call a flanking strategy, which means you are seen to be fairly different. If it's more than 33%, up to 50%, it's the opposite. You are seen to be different. You're the opposite. And if it's beyond that, then you create a new niche, which we call as a guerrilla strategy. So I think if innovation can have its roots in strategy, then it will be better aligned to business and you will see results immediately. Whereas innovation, not as a means but as an end in itself, can be a very frustrating experience. Actually, if you may give me a minute, on the second part of the question in terms of education, etc., I didn't really respond to that. See, I had a big problem by about 2002, 2003 with management education in general, because when I finished college in the late 80s, we read about In Search of Excellence and world-class excellence and stuff, and then it went on to Kaizen, just in time, at least in our industry, Japanese manufacturing practices, Toyota manufacturing system, then it went into Six Sigma, Lean, TQM, Deming, Juran. Before we had come to terms with that, it became blue ocean, core competence, bottom of the pyramid. So the problem is that we became like a bit like a dog chasing its own tail, because before you come to grips with one thing, there's another, because every management guru out there wants to stay on the seminar circuit and put a new book on the shelf. So I grew very disillusioned of this, and then I said to myself, think about a doctor. I mean, when we go to a doctor, would we go to a doctor who fails 92% of the time? We would not. But the truth is, and this is, I think, I'm not sure who's researched and documented this, but it's a well-known fact in the auto industry worldwide. And it's true of India. When I read this, I looked at Indian statistics, it was true. 92% of all new products launched by the auto industry fail. Either they don't sell or they sell without making money. Now, what kind of science is it, that leads you to develop these products, do all the research, FGDs and all that stuff, and at the end of the day, 92 out of 100 fail? I think it's time to abandon that kit. So I asked myself, where can I find a science which is not an anecdote, but which answers to experiment, so that if I repeat the same experiment again and again, I must get the same result. And that actually led me to homeopathy, to be honest. Because in homeopathy there is one Bible, it is called the Organon of Medicine, written by homeopathy's founder, Dr. Samuel Hahnemann. And that Organon lays out 300 aphorisms, 300 principles by which a doctor may successfully treat a patient. Because I found the problem to be this: it is not the lack of ideas in the end. We all agree, and the Harvard professors have said this, Mr. Palepu, etc., that strategy is execution. The challenge is execution. So in homeopathy, that is called posology. How do you give the chosen remedy to the patient? So I picked up 300 principles of execution from homeopathy, because I found that a doctor of homeopathy was doing a better job than most CEOs of auto companies. And when I worked with those principles, we had better success. So yes, I do think our current system of education, which is more about, if I may say, the masters of business administration, needs to change to the masters of business adaptation, because we need to adapt, because the world around us changes really quickly.
Excellent. Rajiv, next question.
India is known as 28 different markets, 28 different sets of people and preferences. So how do you make a national product or a national service?
In fact, I found this to be completely untrue. Again, if I were to lean on homeopathy for 30 seconds, I would say, see, it says there are two worlds we live in, the material world and the immaterial world. All cause and all cure lies in the immaterial world, but we can only measure material things. So what we are doing is measuring only symptoms. When we say there are 28 different Indias out there, it's only symptoms. I can tell you from experience not only of Bajaj, but from a BlackBerry phone or a Mercedes car or an Apple iPhone or whatever, consumers are universally the same. So one doesn't need to go out there and create different products for different markets. Sure, the product mix may change. I definitely sell more Pulsars in Delhi than I do in Narayangaon, and more Discovers in Narayangaon versus Delhi. But it's the same Pulsar and the same Discover that are sold at both the places. What does change from market to market is not the product. What changes from market to market is your competition. And hence, it is not the product that needs to change, but it is the way we position ourselves, because we have to position ourselves in contrast to the competition. So what must change by market is strategy, positioning, and how one creates a perception about oneself, not the product. So for example, Pulsar, with 50% market share in the sports motorcycle segment, was a first mover and hence is the leader of the sports market in India. It's the same Pulsar that will be sold in Europe through our partners KTM, but there, if I may say so, it's a poor man's sports motorcycle. So the position is completely different depending on the state of evolution of the market and the nature of competition. But there is no difference in the product. So the material remains the same. It's the thought, the immaterial strategy that has to change.
Please.
Sure. What amongst these two is an Indian entrepreneur's strength and weakness? Is it mind or heart?
Mind or
Heart.
This question can be asked in many ways, in my opinion. Shall I answer?
Yeah.
It's like saying, is strategy more important or execution? Is the front end more important or the back end? Is it more important to be a promoter or a professional? So people have this knack of asking this question. Then one day I decided, it's like saying, is the father more important or the mother? So So I said to myself, from a child's point of view, the father and mother are both secondary. The good marriage is what is important for the child. So So it is not your heart or your mind or any other part of your body, because that is a reductionist thinking like that of the 5 blind men on the elephant. In the end, you are one jiva, you are one kai, you are one immune system, you are one atma, and that atma is what is important.
Very well said. Now, I'm going to.
I will use another analogy, not homeopathy, enough. Somebody asked me what my hobby was, and I said my passion is homeopathy and yoga, my hobby is Bajaj Auto. So I will tell you a little bit about yoga, because we have in Pune a very fortunate situation. We have Guruji Iyengar, who at 92 does 3 hours of yoga every morning. He is our teacher. And once when I was just having a conversation with him about business or strategy, etc., I will tell you not exactly what he said, but what I understood from what he said in that context, which helped me in business terms. So that's the thought I would leave behind. He said the first thing you do in an asana is to take a position, any position, standing position, forward bend, backward bend, inverted, whatever. So in the same way, in a marketplace, a company needs to take a position. Secondly, he said, you have to find your center in the position. You know you have found your center in the position when you are effortless in this position. As long as you are tense, your mind is hurried, your breath is sharp, your pulse is racing, your eyes are wide open, you are not at ease. You must find your center in the position where you are at ease. In the same way, a business must align the front and back end nicely so that business becomes stress-free, at least to a large extent, like the gentleman from the south was explaining. You should enjoy your life, you should enjoy the business. So find your center is the second thing. And the third thing he says is when you find the center, then you can stretch and you can bend and you can expand from there, because expansion is freedom. So in the same way, once any brand or business finds its center, then it can expand from there and enlarge the business, because we all have to grow. So take a position, find your center, expand from there. This was a good learning for me that day. Maybe it's a good learning for them also.